Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the UF Law eDiscovery Conference. We're going on to our next panel in just a few minutes. We're having a little bit of a technical issue here. I'd like the panel members to come on screen now, if you would, please. Thank you, Scott. And Farah, great, good to see you. Hello, Dan, welcome aboard. Nice to have you here. Martha, good to see you. And Gina, welcome. This is a great panel that we've put together, led by Farah. And we're going to get rocking and rolling now. We're going to be talking about short messages. We're going to be talking about Slack. We're going to be talking about Teams, which is, to me, the big challenge of this past year is how to deal with these new forms of electronically stored information. And we've got a great group to talk to you about it. So I'll turn it over to you now. Farah, please run with it.
Hi, everyone. So delighted to be here with you today. Just give us a moment, please, while we get set up. We're hiding our non-video participants and getting set up over here. So we have a great panel for you today, and I see I'm the only one who went with blue. I don't know what I was thinking. I mean, apparently the colors of the day were Gator Orange. And before we get started, I would like to say, Scott Milner, obviously, oh, well, thank you, sir. Thank you, because I'm getting set up here. And this didn't work. You know, I will say before we dive in, I tried so hard to get the green screen to work, and it's just an epic fail. I have edges. We're going to have to work on my delivery. But at any rate, we're going to share the screen, and then you'll be focused on our material today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This is really a fantastic panel that we have today. So excited to share with you our panelists on screen. And before we even dive into the material, I'd like to take a chance to have everyone just say a few words about themselves. So I'm your moderator, Farah Pepper. I'm from Marsh McLennan, and my role as Chief Legal Innovation Counsel. I'll be guiding you today through this program. But the real stars of our program are, in fact, our panels. So why don't we just go in the order of whoever I see first. Let's start with Scott and work our way down. Please introduce yourself and give everyone a sense of your credentials here, not just that you're a Gator.
Yes, of course. So hi, you had to hear me last hour, but my name is Scott Milner. I'm a partner and one of the co-leaders at Morgan, Lewis & Bockius' eData practice group based here in Philadelphia. I've actually been born and bred out of eDiscovery. I started back in 2002 and was working started in hard copy and then built process around discovery and have been in the industry ever since. And I love this conference and I love this panel because this is a real issue that we're encountering on a daily basis now. And I'm hoping that you'll get some good takeaways from me and the rest of the panelists on addressing short messaging.
Terrific. Gina.
Hi, everyone. I am Gina Sansone, and I am a Gator from the law school. Had a great time. I've been leading Axon, Veltrup, and Harkrider's eDiscovery department and other litigation support areas for 11 years and handling assorted eDiscovery issues for a lot longer. And I also teach eDiscovery law as an adjunct professor at Pace Law School.
All right, Martha.
Hey everyone, my name is Martha Laux. I'm Director of Technology Services in McDermott. I've got a pretty lengthy history in eDiscovery related to short messages. I've worked on some really challenging cases with lots and lots of mobile data, and we had to learn on the fly how to deal with that. So I've got a lot of hands-on experience, and I'm looking forward to talking about this topic. It's a pet project of mine.
Awesome. And Dan.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Dan Regard. I'm a programmer, a lawyer. I'm the founder of iDiscovery Solutions. Text messaging and short messages is just one more flavor of the type of data we're dealing with, but it's a real crucial one right now. And I learned as much preparing for this panel as I hope I can share with you today.
Wonderful. And so the topic of the day is short messaging. Now, short messaging might not mean something to everyone. And what we're going to do today is a couple of things. We're going to try to define what that means. And we're also going to give you a couple of polls. But more importantly, we're going to hear from our panel today about what exactly they are seeing in their practice, what are they seeing from clients, and what do they recommend that we do about this burgeoning area. if you'll pardon me for 1 second, I am in fact having technical difficulties. Let me try to boot this up again. But before, we know this material cold, so I'm just going to kick it to Dan and say, please set the scene about short messaging and what it is and what we're going to do with it.
Well, the issue is that communications have always been of high demand in litigation and for evidence. Whether it was document memos or letters, we moved to email because email became such a predominant or dominant form of communications. The email channels that we've had over the last 20, 30 years have now fragmented into dozens, if not hundreds of different solutions from a technology perspective to let parties type comments back and forth to each other, whether it's a collaborative platform, whether it's a text messaging tool, whether it's Chatter, Slack, a variety of methodologies. And every new technology that comes out, whether it's message-centric or communications is a byproduct or by skill or by function of this tool, adds messagings to it. And it's very easy to do that with the programming tools that are out there today. So every new software that comes out, you see, will have its messaging capability. And these all fall under the rubric of short messages. I mean, we just had a case where somebody said, we're using a new customer support system called Help Scout. And there is no functionality to extract 250,000 emails and text messages. And so that's just an example of an emerging technology. It's cloud-based, and it's got a messaging center. And how do you deal with that? And that's what we wanted to talk about. So for me, historically, the request used to be, give us all the relevant emails. That simple request is now fragmented into what I call the Mississippi River Delta problem. Dozens of different platforms, and some of them people just list in their discovery request out of an abundance of caution because I don't know which ones you're using. But let me give you some examples of what I mean. In this case, SMS, iMessage, Slack, Jira, WhatsApp, Trello, Salesforce Chatter, Facebook Messenger, and so forth, and so forth, and so on. And so we're seeing that because of that fragmentation. But go ahead.
I was going to say, I think one of the things we should do is actually put up the first poll. If University of Florida will put up the first poll, I think it'd be interesting to see what the audience thinks about short messaging, how much they're dealing with it. So we want to know, have you requested short messages in Discovery, or are you still back on email? Give it a couple minutes. All right. All right, so that's pretty interesting. 51% have, and I'm glad that the 17% that are asking what short messages are here today.
Let me ask a question of my own panelists right now. Farah, would it help if I were to take control of the slides?
1,000,000%, Dan. Would you like to do that?
I hate being in charge of the slides. Let me see what I can do.
My hero. But while he's doing that, I will note, this is an aggressive group, right? Because what are we seeing there? 51% of this group has already requested short messaging from others, which presupposes a few things. You know what it is. You know it may have value. And may I be so bold as to suggest you may be comfortable providing it in return, because you generally don't open up a door unless you're willing to have that conversation. So perhaps not surprisingly, for this group, we're seeing more than half has already engaged in that kind of request.
Well, so here we have what I was just talking about, the short list of fragmented sources for communications. Let's take a look at what some of these actually look like. I have some screenshots here. Here's a screenshot from Slack. And this is interesting only because I was able to kill two birds with one stone. Slack has the ability to have rules in your messages, and here you can actually add a rule that causes messages to transmit after certain periods of time or even delete after certain periods of time, certainly raising the bar on preservation and collection. But this is what Slack looks like if you haven't seen it, and it's got individuals, it's got channels, it's got direct messages. You might say it looks like a sophisticated, mature chat program, and that's how it behaves many times. You also have the ability in the right-hand corner to tag with the @ individuals or to drop in the ever-transmittable and understandable emojis, which we will come back to shortly. Here's another program that we deal a lot with software development and project tracking called Jira. And Jira allows us to manage messages through themes or boards. And each one of these you can drill down into and see alternative messages, message threads. It's a messaging platform. It's different from Slack, but it's equally capable. If you're using Office 365, you may be familiar with Microsoft Teams. It's a messaging app integrated into the overall environment for O365 and allows us to track communications that can be one-to-one, one-to-many, or many-to-many, or many-to-one. Another example would be Trello. We're also seeing a convergence, as you can tell, between programming tools and programming platforms. So some of these text messaging apps, even though they may have slightly different functionality, can have similar presentations of when was the last posting, how many messages are out there, what is the thread. Each one of these can capture important communications depending on a given litigation or scope of issues. Here are some apps you may be familiar with from your smartphone, whether you have an Android or an iPhone. You may be familiar with Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp. You may be familiar with the iMessage on the iPhone platform. And this is Microsoft, I believe, SMS Manager for Android. So all of these are different. Some of them are controlling the same content. Sometimes the content is supplemented or augmented with additional functionality. It creates, as I'm going to come back to again and again, a very fragmented world that causes challenges, but it's also an information-rich world that is an obvious target and goal for litigation and discovery.
Yeah.
Now,
so, Dan, I would say before we get too far into it, this might be a perfect place for us to drop in our second poll, which is kind of the related question. Have you had to produce or work with them? So not just have you asked for it, but have you had someone ask you? So let's just take a moment. If you don't mind, everyone pop your answers in and let's see if it's roughly equivalent to our first question or if it differs.
I wish we could vote.
I wish we could. Very interesting. Okay, so more than half have asked for it, but also far less than half have actually had to produce or work with it, and more than half have said, nope, nopers, not going to produce, not going to work with it, or at least I haven't had to yet. And I commend our bold 6% who are just like, what are short messages? That's why I'm on this panel today. Explain it to me. So good for you for your honesty. All right, back to you, Dan.
I think it's important to recognize just because a source has short messages does not automatically make it part of discovery. And just because a smartphone has access to messaging doesn't mean it's the best place for discovery. And there are a lot of other reasons to try to go to systems of record rather than devices, because individual devices can often be commingled with PII or personal information. I know we're going to try to keep this within an hour, but if anybody wants a free checklist on how to determine should a device or a text message source be in scope or out of scope, we have those posted on our website at idsinc.com, and you can have those for free, these checklists. And they'll help you frame these issues because, again, not everything is in scope. But beyond that, what is in scope, let's look at LinkedIn. This is interesting. When you're collecting these messages, here's a LinkedIn page. My text messages for LinkedIn are showing. I've fuzzed them out a little bit so I can protect the innocent. What's really nice is that when you can fade back the background of LinkedIn and just focus on what these messages are, these can be relevant for communications. These can be relevant for litigation. With LinkedIn, you can self-serve. You can self-download your own text messages and a variety of other aspects of your LinkedIn account, and I did exactly that, and it comes down like this. It shows me the conversation ID for each text message or short message, the conversation title, who it was from, a link to that person's profile, who it was to. You would say it's always to me, but some of these are actually responses from me back to them, the date, the subject, the content, and the folder. And you can organize your messages in LinkedIn just like a mailbox. I don't, but I could have any variety of folders here. This is the text messages. These are short messages. In LinkedIn, it's easy. They come down in text format. In other systems, they don't. They can come down in HTML. They can come down in an email format like MSG or EML. They can come down in JSON. In fact, we're seeing quite a bit of JSON, and it almost becomes a challenge for those of you who are not familiar with JSON. And I'll say again, if you have any need for pointers or assistance or a soundboard on JSON projects, let us know. We do quite a bit of that. But LinkedIn is doing us all a favor by downloading this. The real question is, what do we do with it once we get it? So there's some pros and cons of short messages. When they're created from the creation perspective, they're easy to create, they're fast to create, they can be collaborative. When people create them, they can be emotionally uninhibited because they're created so fast. We used to think emails were emotionally driven. Emails are a poor second to text messages. They can be multimedia. They can have non-text. They can have GIFs, emojis, emoticons, video clips, links, photographs, videos you make yourself. They can be integrated into other collaborative platforms or standalone. And because they're so fast, they can be so granular, almost 1 or 2 words a piece, back and forth, and they can accumulate a volume very quickly. The negatives, they are uninhibited. They're informal, so they're, from a business perspective, they don't often rise to the level of business records. They can be abbreviated, which makes it hard to read them or understand them or interpret them, especially if you don't hang out with the kids and know what the kids are saying today. We mentioned the emojis and the GIFs. Because they are so short and hard to understand, they require greater context to interpret the ambiguity that's inherent in there, a high volume, a variety of formats, and people have shown a facility to change channels, whether they're texting, emailing, using chat. In this conference today, I've used 4 or 5 different channels simultaneously to broker conversations and answer questions with different participants.
And Dan, speaking of that, how about this breaking news? We've been chatting and receiving some great questions from the audience. And to mix things up, we're going to just throw them in. You know, all the rules are going out the door during this panel. So
I'm going to rely on the rest of the panel to answer the question. Those are the answers.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. This is the hot seat, and we're going to throw at least a couple out there. One that came in that I think is kind of related to what you're talking about now about the form of this information is, you know, when you're talking about wearable devices such as smartwatches, is that short messages? And if so, what do you think about discovery from that?
Well, the device itself is not a message, but the device allows us to create messages. The iWatch, for example, allows you to do drawings with your finger that are interpreted back into words or emojis, or you can choose from a pick list of short answers, so you don't have to type it, but you can definitely send it and you're communicating. So yes, they are a source of very convenient short messaging.
What I would also say, though, is that the user activity data, like where they were and when they logged into this or any of those sorts of things, those can certainly also be a component of discovery because it reveals the person's activity. Maybe it could show some intent or something like that. But that's fundamentally, that's IoT, Internet of Things data, where it's pretty structured. You know, we're talking about data points, not human language. The short message component is the human language. I mean, it's short because it's not an email or a memo, but, you know, it can be longer depending on text limits.
I think,
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Point. I think that though those 2 data sources can be married together, though, because the message with that Internet of Things instrumental data or instrument data that allows us to put context around that short message. When the short message says, I can't talk right now, do you know if they're in a crisis or if they're just jogging?
Well, let's do this. We want to keep it live. We want to keep it active. So I would say let's just like plow right into, we have 2 more polls for the audience, and we really want to hear from you and be engaged. So there we go. Thank you. So next poll. In the last year, in how many matters did you have to preserve, collect, process, review, and produce short messages? Now, obviously, this is just going to be a portion of our sample because we know it was something like 41% who had to deal with that. So, of you lucky intrepid souls, you know, how many was it? And everybody else, feel free to do 0.
Farrah, I'm going to have you do the math for us of the 41%, only one.
Oh, dear God. Scott, I was law school. I was told there'd be no math, and it was a lie. You know, there will be no percentages. But this is interesting, right? What this does tell us is that for most people, even those who are dabbling, it's not prevalent. It's not like you're seeing it on every request or it's routine the way you would do other sources. It looks like it's been a handful for the vast majority, which is probably somewhat consistent with the evolving nature of this, and that it's kind of catching on but isn't routine yet. All right, very good. Well, we've got another poll. You know, we're keeping you lively today. Next poll and final one for the day. Which short messaging platform has been at issue the most? So again, of our subset who has had to deal with this, where's the action?
That one maybe should have been multiple choice.
Perhaps. Pick
No,
your
I think
most.
you want to see which one's the most. Of
Most.
Oh, the most, yeah.
Like, which
Yeah,
one do you
it's kinda
curse
hard
at
to
night
force
into your
ranking.
pillow?
There we go.
There we
what
go.
we
The
expect.
vast
Interesting.
majority is still dealing with, you know, your text, your chat message, your, not just your standard SMS, but your WhatsApp, your WeChat, you know, your round the globe communication third-party platforms. Very good. All right, thanks everyone. We appreciate you doing this so expeditiously and promptly. All right, so so if we bring it back, another question that we saw from the audience is what do you do, I'm paraphrasing here, what the heck do you do with something like the free version of Slack? You know, if you've got clients who are using that, you know, how do you manage retention on that? Which obviously is a very open-ended question and one we cannot fully answer today, but any thoughts on things like that?
I would recommend collection as preservation in that instance, like, you know, trying to get the data out. There are a lot of different service providers that have connectors into Slack that could help, I think, collect that data.
And to add to that, there's also a little bit of an issue because the free Slack account doesn't exactly give you access to everything. So there are some steps, unfortunately, that you have to go through in order to even get access, which involves applying to Slack to get access to things beyond just the public channels. So the free account gives you public channels. The more you pay, the more you get access to. So that's when you would get the private channels, is when you pay a little bit more and you upgrade your subscription. But until you have an enterprise option, which is the very, very, very highest and most expensive, which I have to tell you, our chief technology officers are not thinking about that in these companies. They're thinking about privacy right now, for sure. They're thinking about potentially information governance, and they're not really thinking about when they bring on these collaborative tools, oh, let me get the tool that's appropriate for discovery purposes and legal holds down the line. As you might imagine, that's probably tertiary in what they're concerned about. So, you know, you do have the unfortunate loopholes to jump through to apply to Slack when you have the free or even the it's called Plus subscriptions. You have to apply to Slack to get that information out, and even then they can say no, which seems absolutely crazy. And there's some cases that we're going to cover in a few slides if we get there, that, you know, where the parties have been able to argue, hey, listen, I don't have possession, custody, and control here. I don't own this data. It's in Slack's world, not mine, which, you know, is an interesting take. And I think that's going to be part of the evolving technology and teaching the courts.
Well, and Gina, I'll make the note, that's fabulous in the sense that the more things change, the more they stay the same, in the sense that we're talking about Slack, but at the end of the day, we're talking about possession, custody, or control. So you never really get away from the core concepts, do you?
Absolutely. You know, we're applying the same framework to the evolving technology, and even as we get to the end, you know, that will be a lot of, you know, what we really hit home and emphasize.
Well, one of the things that is also important is even if you have possession, custody, and control, and you have the ability to download messages or capture them, some of these systems do have central command, and some of them do not have central command, and they're highly decentralized, which means you have to go to individual devices or individual custodians to do a full collection. And that certainly changes the equation when it comes to proportionality. So
absolutely.
Not all platforms are the same.
Well, and I see we're getting a whole bunch of great questions streaming in, which is amazing. But let's try to chug through a little bit more of the material we wanted to be sure to give to you. And then we'll jam in as many questions as we can. So, Dan, if you could sort of race us through and get us a little ahead here.
We were talking about text messages versus contextual information. Here's a graphic of hard numbers on the left, artistic on the right, contextual on the left, content on the right. We find that we talk about action data. What is ambient, contextual, transactional, instrumental, and how to marry that with the short messages. We went through our polls. We went through poll number 4, and we move into, in the e-discovery process, how are short messages challenging?
You know, so generally, big picture, they really are challenging at every step. As we're seeing in the questions with people asking about format and how do you review them and how do you process them and how do you produce them, you know, every step of the way there is a challenge. And particularly as these messages are exploding in volume, right? I mean, I probably draft more texts and IMs at this point than I do emails. In fact, email's almost too slow, which seems crazy, where at one point email was the premier, where it's now become almost like the formal business record, as opposed to before, you know, that was the more informal business record. So, you know, attorneys and litigation support really need to make it our job to learn the technology and the functionality to figure out, you know, where they're saved, how can they be accessed, and, you know, how generally are people communicating with each other. So hopefully we can actually stay on top of the rapidly changing technology, because it changes much faster than we're keeping up.
So let's talk about preservation and collection.
Yes. And also, Gina, let's tell people, what can you do other than crying softly into your pillow at night?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So, you know, physical devices, text messages, obviously they're not cutting edge, but these are still the dominant short message source that we're all seeing. We saw that in the polls. And, you know, generally where the challenges come in is that users have these individual settings that control how long they keep or don't keep their messages. So it could oftentimes, although there is mobile device management software out there, I have to tell you, we have some of the largest clients, and we're still not seeing it really used to the extent with text messages where it's being maintained and controlled, where messages are kept in a sandbox, so to speak, where the organization can control it. So it really is up to the custodians and the individuals to turn off their auto-delete settings on their phones and keep their messages for the adequate amount of time. I won't go into the Paisley opinion too deep, but it really is a good opinion that walks through the analysis. It's a sanctions analysis, but it does go through the issues with individual custodians and users turning off their auto delete function. And you know, I'd be shocked to say, I'm sure that every single one of us on this panel at some point has suffered this rap, and you know, your heart sinks. Sorry, Scott, I see you're about to jump in.
No, I want to make sure I'm prepared off mute for once. I 100% agree with you on these issues, and I think there's a lot of questions on how do you collect the data. We've listed some common, you know, ways to collect the data here. There's other things that you can do to preserve it as well. I mean, simple, if you're an Apple user, simple iTunes backup and retain the data until you know whether you need it, or an iCloud backup. Just understand that, I think Gina was really talking about this, is that your settings are appropriate, because some people change their text to delete every 2 days or every day, or some people have their WhatsApp to only retain for a certain period of time or not back up, and those are critical things to make sure that, to ensure preservation of the mobile data that you're dealing with it. One kind of pitfall on collection is just think about encryption. Some of these short messages are encrypted, and understanding at the time of collection what you're doing to avoid the encryption issues. Otherwise, you've been collecting data, you may never touch it, and all of a sudden when you need to go to it, you don't have the password or other encrypted information.
So let's look at some additional items around preservation and collection. Collaborative applications. Any additional comments here?
So I'll take this. So that, you know, the table in this slide demonstrates, excuse me, all the locations where information in Teams, not just related to messages, but generally all kinds of information can be stored. And it's, you know, we just want to make it clear that it's not a single repository, but the information is stored in several locations. So, you know, in order to preserve this information, it has to be done with each separate repository, and there's no really single keystroke for doing this. If you're trying to preserve Teams information in response to a legal hold, you can see how extremely tricky this can be to locate and track down all the potentially relevant information, especially if there really are no policies or rules for employees to use and guides on regarding how they should be using this technology and what they should be using it for. You know, the hard reality is that as we learn and get better at this technology, and as our clients get better at this technology, information will likely get missed, and that maybe should have been preserved, that was overlooked. And so I think, you know, something to keep in mind throughout this, and not to use as a safety, but we really need to remember that reasonableness and perfection is not the rule.
Well, and I say, you know, Gina, let's sort of keep chugging along because we have so much information we want to convey to the audience. But I would say, to tie a bow on what you're saying, I'm actually on this panel, I'm the only one who's in the client role. You know, we've got our esteemed outside counsel, we've got our partner provider, and so I feel like I can say this and mean it from the bottom of my heart. You really should be getting help. You know, for those of you who are grappling with this and struggling with this, you may be blessed with an internal IT department who has mastered all of the nuances of these tools. You probably aren't. And in that case, there is no shame in reaching out to trusted partners who are studying this, who are watching the close evolution. Even people who are on top of their game in this area are finding that the changes are just so constant. And because we're now in a cloud environment, we don't control the upgrades. They just happen. And so this is an area where it's like, if you see something, say something. And that something is, please come help me.
One point on Teams, I do not think that our industry currently has a good solution for legal hold or collection on this. I have talked to so many people. Teams is, in my belief, going to be the headache for all of us very soon. There was enormous adoption of Teams in the COVID world. And as Gina was saying, the data is stored like in all kinds of different locations on the back end. The emails are parked in a conversation history, or like they make fake emails and put them in a conversation. It's a mess. It's super complicated. And I think this is like the way the future is going to go.
Part of the challenge is, even if you get all of the data out of these systems, as you were just pointing out, the systems are creating communications that no longer fit within our vision of the four corners of a document or the four corners of an email. So we're basically transforming it to fit into something for a document review platform by making it artificially look like a starting and a stopping point, when that's not the way they're created, that's not the way they're stored. You don't want to recreate the Teams database or the Help Scout database in order to make that data look and behave the same just for litigation purposes. But you need to be aware that what you're looking at in a static format is not the way it was in a dynamic format.
All right, let's keep chugging. Dan, take us through. Obviously, more cases here. I'm going to go out on a limb and say these are more cases. You can read them later, but let's get moving to the next concept. Exactly.
But it's not words. It doesn't look the same.
That's right. Those emojis are all of us when we join the 41% that have to produce this data.
Let's talk about what it means to process these things, though.
Yeah, so processing, this is where I get on my soapbox and talk about this point. I think that the biggest challenge facing us in discovery when it comes to short message data, whether it's collaboration platforms, text messages, chats, whatever it is, we do not have a form to process it. And what I mean by process is, because people use the term process very loosely, what I mean specifically is taking data and ingesting it into an e-discovery processing platform to extract the metadata and then export it to some kind of format or push it to a review platform, okay? We don't do that. We format stuff now, and everybody's formatting it differently. Everybody's doing it differently, and this is the real challenge. I think like with email, there's PST, there's Mbox, and maybe occasionally you'll still run into an NSF file. That's kind of most of it. I mean, MSG, EML, whatever, but you suck it into the platform, you extract the data, and then you review it. But we know it's repeated, it's defensible, it's programmatic. There is no such solution when it comes to these collaborative platforms, and therefore you're not extracting metadata, you're not actually OCRing and making things text searchable. So with that said, I don't think we've got a great solution in our industry yet for this, although some folks are working in that direction. I'm very eager to see what they come up with. But when we get to the analysis and review, there's some real challenges. And how do we actually do this? Like logistically, what do we do?
So we saw that I was able to export LinkedIn into Excel. I've seen Excel as the platform for, or the format for exchanging some of these sometimes, but there are other ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people are like, oh, I'll just do it in Excel. It is totally fine. You know, I've got this Excel. Basically, it's got 3 or 4 different conversations. I can do it offline. One person can sit there and just scroll through and everything looks fine. And then I can just take out the ones I don't want to produce and send it. Hey, don't forget your natives, by the way, if you do this. Don't forget the bucket of natives. Don't forget to delete the ones that you don't want to produce, okay? That's just a little tip on the side. And she feels pretty good about it, you know. I think that's not too bad. And most people say, I just want to do it in Excel. I understand. It's easy.
But then you got to make
what are you going to do when you have like a lot of devices because you've got 6 different phones or something like that? So what we do then is we say, all right, well, let's make some load files because this is e-discovery. We're going to make load files and put things into a database. So, you know, we turn all the different lines of Excel. Each line becomes a line in a DAT file. Sarah, you want to hit that, or Dan, you want to click that?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So, okay, we've got all these different Excels. Now, each one of those, we've got to break them out into all these conversations. I mean, it's not a small amount of data. This can turn into a huge number of records extremely quickly. And our man is tired and he is worn out. This is something that is doable, but very challenging and difficult to read. And you have to really think about your database design carefully.
So then after you get it, you still need to analyze it and review it.
Yeah, and this is, you know, where I have seen a lot of challenges. I mean, people talk, I still remember the old instant messaging and the fact that people were very much just communicating very off the cuff, different terminology, acronyms, shorthand. It's like my 10 and 8-year-old texting. Sometimes I have to actually ask them what they mean. And it's no different in some of these short messaging. And so when you're thinking about review, thinking about, you know, how do you want to actually analyze the data? What is the start and stop of a conversation? Unfortunately, a long text or a Teams, it's no longer maybe about a single topic, where you may have an email with a subject line, and maybe the subject line there, maybe you change it, maybe you don't. It's very hard to get context depending on how you're looking at the data. What's the search methodology? Again, talked about different technologies and terminology. Can you use analytics? Can you use things like threading to actually put together the full story of a communication in short messaging? We showed you the picture of the emojis. We glossed over it slightly, but you know, emojis are searchable. And there's other technologies when you embed videos and audio that can be transcribed and actually searchyou. So how you actually put together a review protocol for Slack, Teams, and other short messaging, it's really critical because if you have again, I've seen this where you just put it in with the rest of the data. Reviewers don't understand it, and they're like, oh, non-responsive, because they don't see it in context. There's little they can do to actually tell what is going on, and it's all of a sudden non-responsive. So if you don't share with them what you're doing, how you're setting it up, you could be really impacting, uncovering real evidence, good or bad, but regardless, subject to your discovery obligations. Or more importantly, I'm using a lot of these messages in investigations. So it's not just in discovery. I'm actually finding out that I'm spending more time in Slack, Teams, and other short messages when I'm working in internal investigations for a client.
Absolutely. And here we see a quick example of JSON format. It looks well organized. It's just not easy to read. And typically it's seen as just one dense package of ASCII characters. It's not even hierarchically tiered like it is here. So just getting it into a format you can read and interact with it can be challenging. We've had to write special tools to do that work, but not everyone has access to those tools or those skills.
Well, this really is a brave new world, and I'll mention this. It's not that we haven't had to deal with emojis and emoticons and things like that before. They've been around. It's just that there's an explosion now. When you have natively built in all sorts of images and GIFs and, you know, gyrating penguins that are just sitting there waiting to be sent in internal corporate messages, that just really changes the dynamic. There are times where I'll have conversations with peers because we are Teams users where, you know, there is more visual than there is textual. That is just how people are communicating now. And so that is changing the paradigm.
And I think, Farah, your point is good. I mean, it's not that you couldn't embed an emoji in an email. It's just people were writing a little bit more formal in an email. And I feel like the short messaging, you're seeing a lot more in I guess, more shorthand, just infamiliarity of how they're communicating with their colleagues. It's just different. So it's a lot more data being subject to these issues.
I think emojis carry emotion, and these short
100%.
going back so forth tend to contain much more of an emotional response, and the emojis seem to fit with those short emotional responses. Like, you said something great, haha, and there's my face with the crying eyes and the tears shooting out because it's so funny. I'm crying, I'm laughing so hard.
Well, when you think about, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think emojis are potentially a super interesting opportunity for us, because one of the things that's exciting in AI is sentiment analysis. You know, it's positive, it's negative, et cetera. What I think is super cool is if you have a positive sentiment with a negative emoji, or the reverse, that could indicate sarcasm, which is something that computers have been dreadful at for a long time. So it could be a really cool thing.
All right, let's head through review production and get on to the home stretch.
What would we like to get? We have an opportunity here, my fellow panelists, to talk to a crowd of 2,000 attendees. What would we like the industry to look like in 12 months?
Well, I think advanced analytics is one thing where, as you were saying earlier, Dan, people are communicating cross-platform. We've got other data points like a person's activity, a GPS location, a Wi-Fi network, whatever else there is. Having the ability to combine these different sources and track a person's activity in a timeline is going to be really important, and that's not something that we currently have available. So I'd love to see some advanced analytics in the future.
And I think you were hitting, Martha, but we talked about this, just some standardization. With new technology and collaboration tools being thrown out every day, having a way to handle them, whether from information governance, data identification, preservation, production, we need some standardization and best practices because they're all over the board. We had a long leadway with an email of how to address it. Now there's new technologies evolving, and as outside counsel, I'm not in the business of telling Farah she can't roll out a new technology that's not going to enhance the business. I just have to become kind of fluent in that new technology and understand how to build a process around it so that she can respond adequately to the discovery obligations.
But along those lines, as much as standardization and best practices are wonderful, as we've all discussed multiple times on our practice calls, being flexible is huge here. Where I think sometimes we get so caught up in in the necessary fields and the standardization that we lose sight of the actual substance of the conversation. And so I think being flexible and being able to work with the evolving technology and what it can actually do for us versus what we hope and think it can do for us are two different things. I think we need to be aware and mindful that sometimes we put format over substance. So, but I think being flexible is huge.
I would add one thing to this, and it goes along with being flexible, and that is being patient.
Yep.
That we need to ask opposing parties and judges to be a little patient, at least when parties are working in good faith. And I know sometimes there's suspicions, but I'd like to think within the e-discovery circle we have a fairly strong community. And at least I've been fortunate enough to work in a lot of cases where I trust the other side and we can work on these problems collaboratively. We tend to dig into the technology. Be a little patient because these things are different. They're evolving. They're new. And even with best practices, we need some give and take before we jump into emotions practice.
So here's an intriguing question that's come in through Q&A. Given the explosion of new data like short messages and all these difficulties and challenges that we're talking about today to preserve, to collect, to analyze, to produce, there's really nothing about it that seems easy. Is there a legally cognizable theory that the data is, quote, not reasonably accessible? What does the panel think?
In my not a lawyer opinion, I don't think that I could defend that argument effectively.
Well, generally that's not where the case law goes, that just because you've chosen a technology that's more complicated and you've decided to stick your information in a place that you can't get access to shouldn't really support a reasonably accessible argument. However, there's been court opinions that find that to be true. So I will stop there. Dan, I see you about to say something.
Listen, we've had a extraordinarily high track record of extracting data when it needs to be extracted.
Absolutely.
So I have difficulty with the not accessible or not reasonably accessible. Unless it's broken or disintegrated or the password's been lost, it's accessible usually. I'd say usually 98% of the time, but there is a real question around, is it proportionate?
Well, that's what I was gonna go is back to the last panel is there a better source for information and discovery that is less complicated to address? That's, to me, how I would probably tackle it rather than not reasonably accessible. Service providers in our industry have made everything accessible for a price. So the question becomes, is that the best use of dollars and best way to get data, or can we get it somewhere else? And I think we tried to share this. We've given a lot of different solutions that are high-tech, advanced, but sometimes a good old screen capture may suffice for your case. Again, we've seen a lot of folks that are solo practitioners are dealing with small case discovery. It doesn't have to be the $1 million solution. We can look at ways to capture things by doing exports, screen captures, and just retain the data in a native format. And then if you need to go back to it, you can determine whether there's the reason to do that and the cost associated with that.
So some of you may be thinking, this is an interesting panel, but this really deals with tomorrow's problem, not today. And this panel felt that William Gibson really represented the answer to that conundrum, which is the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So people are already doing this. They're already making it accessible. They're already dealing with it. We're just not dealing with it on every case or every single team. But I think we're going to get there, just like we got there with email. Farah, that brings us to the takeaways. Can you lead us through that?
Absolutely. So, if you're not just demoralized after this whole panel, we're going to give you a little bit of hope, right, to take away with you. So what do you do with all this information? We've got this thorny challenge. It kind of dates back to the early days of discovery when everyone wasn't quite sure what to do with new data sources. So what do? You got to start planning. You got to have your acceptable use policies. It goes back to good old-fashioned making rules and policies and trying to draw the lines that if you're in an institution, your employees will follow, and if you're giving advice to them to help them to craft them, you got to sort of go in with the assumption that you probably can't argue that all your corporate tools are not reasonably accessible. You have to assume that someday some of them may, in fact, be proportional and may in fact be accessible, and so you've got to plan for that day, and obviously as part of that, planning for your legal holds and preservation. But so what's the hopeful part of all this? That's just the challenges. The hopeful part is, as this industry has done before, this is an opportunity to make the law and make some change. This is an opportunity for us to educate our adversaries, to educate the requesting party, to educate the judges. And for all of us who are practitioners in this space, it's always fun to educate ourselves. This is something thorny. This is something that hasn't quite been fully solved yet. And so this is a great opportunity for us to put on our thinking hats and to say, how do the old laws and standards apply to this new data set? So I actually think it's an incredibly intellectually refreshing exercise where it's not all signed, sealed, and delivered, and we have to basically revisit what we did once upon a time and figure out how are we as an industry going to standardize and solve these challenges.
Farah, I see that someone had a question that could these short messages be troublesome, not because they're not reasonably accessible, but because they contain so much personal information or they're commingled with personal messaging. Can we direct everybody to the next panel?
We sure can. I think we just did. And it's kind of perfect timing because we have used up our stage time here. And I regret we didn't get a chance to answer all of your questions, but please encourage all of you to reach out to us individually. We'd be happy to chat. Thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Wonderful panel. Challenging stuff ahead of us. That's very, very difficult and very, very complex. I appreciate it very much. And I know the audience appreciates it as well. I do want to follow up on a theme that Farah mentioned. To the audience, we on the faculty here at this conference think of ourselves as working for you, working with you. We want to work together as a community. So reach out to us. Don't be strangers. Most of us, as Maribel was saying, have pages on LinkedIn. We'd be happy to have you be part of our network on LinkedIn. You can reach out to us individually by email. Most of us are very happy to answer questions, that they're bugging all of us, if you will, for lack of a better expression. I remember somebody once said about e-discovery, it's really not what you know, it's whether you know somebody that knows. So that's a motto that we all try and stick with. So please think of us that way as your friends out there in the e-discovery world. We're there for you, not just today, but we're there for you, period. All right, thanks a lot. We're going to take a break now for the next 10 minutes, and then we're going to come back with our privacy panel. Privacy pandemic, the Ps, they're running wild. We'll see you in 10 minutes.